Hi, I'm Skipper Chung Warson, and you're listening to the second season of the How This Works show. Thanks for being here. I also work as a facilitator and leadership coach. Have you ever wondered how people become good at what they do? That's what this show is all about. I chat with a variety of folks about how they got started in some particular subject matter, where they are now, and a number of topics in between. Today, I have Aaron Young with me. He runs Switch Insights based in Atlanta, Georgia. We're going to talk mainly about Switch interviews and what that means for products and services and how that applies to where we live, work, and even buy wedding dresses. Aaron, I appreciate you joining me today.
Sure. I'm excited to chat with you today, Skipper.
So, Aaron, let's start with establishing pronouns. I'm he, him. How should I refer to you?
He, him sounds great.
Awesome. Thank you. So, Aaron, we're going to get into your introduction in a moment, but is there anything about your personality that might be a surprising element or something in your background you'd like to share that some of our listeners may not expect from you?
I think the quirkiest thing about me is how little I care about dessert.
About dessert, really?
Yeah, so I tried chocolate for the first time when I was 27. I was on the streets of Bruges. I was with an ex-girlfriend of mine, and mostly did it out of a challenge to get over with this gimmick that I'd held on my whole life, which I'd avoided this thing that everybody loves. I didn't have ice cream till I was 28. I still haven't had a cupcake or any of these other cookie type things that people love. I basically spent my whole life ignorant to them, disinterested in them, avoidant of them. And at this point, the whole breadth of my sweet tooth is oatmeal raisin cookies and a berry sorbet. But otherwise, and this extends to being a picky eater in many ways. I mostly spent my 20s trying things that are very normal. I remember August of my 25th year was low-hanging fruit month. I had a mango for the first time, a nectarine, a peach, a kiwi. And so, yeah, just a late arrival on most foods and have been able to push into the distant future and hopefully forever desserts because I've got my other vices like jalapeno potato chips.
I like that you've picked a side and desserts is not your side.
Nope. It's always been my two truths and a lie, and it definitely gets attention. So.
Well, Aaron, let's get into the meat of our show. I mentioned a little bit about our subjects that we're going to talk about today in the show's opening, but I want to hear it from you. What are the subjects that we're going to talk about today that you know an awful lot about?
Sure. So I spent much of the last 5, 6, 7 years obsessing, can't get let go of an idea around how people switch products or how people switch in general. I think this is such a big part of our day-to-day lives. We used to have an old equilibrium and now we have a new one. We're struggling to transition from here to there. It could be what products we use in the home, at work, where we live, where we work. So many sort of things in our lives where we're trying to sort of improve, and the same sort of switch dynamics unfold in all those stories. The timeline unfolds in the same way, in a repetitive way, and you can bring the sort of skill of a documentarian to those moments. And when there's a winner and a loser, there's someone with a financial stake in that. There's a way to play a role in helping them win more and lose less, I suppose.
So, Aaron, when did you discover this area of work?
Sure. So I was a new consultant after 12, 13 years working at a set of companies in DC that do best practice research. I was a qualitative researcher looking for a new application of that skill. And in the first project that I did, helping an old company of mine wrestle with a churn problem, I was made aware of a methodology called the switch interview and got to observe a guru, a jobs to be done luminary expert named Bob Mesta, interview our customers. He spent 2 days, 48 hours, well, 2 days, not 48 hours, but you know what I mean, interviewing 10 people who had switched in and out of our product in the last 6 months. And I was incredibly humbled by what I learned. And I think it was sort of reminding yourself of the sort of contextual moment in which that choice happens. What is going on in your customer's life, the very moment, the very day, the pressures they feel when they decide you are going to be or not be part of their lives anymore
Mm.
is a very weird, idiosyncratic moment in their lives. But for companies, that detail is hard to access, often stripped away out of their analysis. And so it was the aha moment was seeing that done, and I couldn't let it go because I had worked at those companies for 12 years and did not know what I learned that day. And I don't think the 300, 400 people who worked very hard every day, Ivy League grads, so smart, so much hubris, I suppose,
Yeah.
could not really reconcile seeing that documentary unfold. And so I thought, well, there are hundreds, thousands of companies globally who struggle with these moments,
Yeah.
struggle to see their products through the eyes of their customer as opposed to see them customers as a person out there in the universe struggling to
Yeah.
make progress, pulling portfolio of solutions into their life to help them get to the other side of the river. And we had lost sight of that struggle and the multiplicity of struggles, and therefore how use of our products played out. And so it was a humbling moment and a moment where I felt like I had to learn this new thing that could be powerful for
Okay.
my future qualitative research businesses.
Got it. So started in qualitative research, discovered jobs to be done, and specifically within jobs to be done, this idea of switch interviews. How long before you stood up your own business? Did you work in this methodology for a while? Were you able to interact with it more? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I've been independent 6, 7 years, but I've only been
Okay.
doing switch interviews for about 2 or 3 years.
I see.
Generally, those first 3, 4 years were me wandering in the wilderness, figuratively, not literally,
Right.
taking on, mid career, accepting whoever trusted me to do something,
Mm.
a chance to sort of help them with a problem they had. And as a researcher by trade, that meant interviews often, but it could have meant a survey or other writing projects, anything that required a lot of questions and analysis at the heart of it. But my favorite projects were these switch interviews because, again, had such a big impact on some problem that a company was facing around either acquisition or churn. And so over time made the decision that I could specialize around this, which I think is a fairly normal path for a consultant who narrows their scope over time towards something that is both there is demand for it in the universe, and then there's pleasure from practicing those verbs for companies every day. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
In our initial conversation, you talked about the notion of switch interviews. Actually, let me back up. So we've been talking about switching in terms of a product. Can it also apply to a service?
Certainly. I think that I will say that people's instinct when they hear switching, they think about churn first,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
have people who are my happy customer, and then suddenly they surprise me and let me know they're going to a competitor or elsewhere in the universe, right?
Sure.
And I think our instinct is to think these are impulsive decisions or that there's a singular root cause behind them. Something happened. But if I ask them directly to explain it to me, they'll be able to summarize it in a neat little
Mm.
package for me.
Mm.
But actually, 3, 4, 7 dominoes fell over some period of time to cause us to detach from our old way of doing something and pick a new way.
Yeah.
And that story in its full breadth is very interesting to learn. Now, switching in as the same dynamics, you're simply the winner
Yeah.
in that context,
Yeah.
right? In that weird world, when I'm doing a switch interview, the company I'm doing it for may not show up until chapter 6, 7, 8 of that story,
Uh,
but they had an old way and everything was at peace, equilibrium. And then something happens that caused them to begin to doubt that their current way was working. And a journey of conviction building unfolds over some period of time until a customer says, it's time, I need to find a new way.
yeah.
And a company wants to position its product to be the obvious solution in the context in which that exasperation boils over.
Yeah.
Now, you asked me a different question, which is about products, services. I could say about voting, about where you live, where you
Sure.
work. All of these stories have the same tug of war between past and future, old
Mm.
equilibrium, new equilibrium.
Mm.
Something is pushing you away from your old way. Something is pulling you towards your new way. There's magnetism. But along that journey, there are headwinds. There's habits you have to break that are
Yeah.
bigger than that tailwind. and there are anxieties you have to overcome. And these stories unfold in fits and starts as you build conviction that the new way is worth taking a chance on, and so my wife is currently considering changing jobs, and we observe her switch in all its sort of messiness every day, that there are various grievances that have built up with her old employer. There's magnetism and excitement about this new role for which she was offered a job.
I see.
But she's got anxiety about whether, what she's giving up, and habits that are going to be hard to break. And the story is sort of unfolding in front of us, and we can see all the dimensions of that story together. And so services, products, votes, everything, this sort of analysis, the way the stories unfold is always going to be a multi-step, multi-domino journey that brings somebody to the precipice of changing.
Yeah. So I think when you're talking about switching, I think another word that can stand in for that is this idea of change. And change has lots of things, that push-pull that you described. It can also have part of what we're going up against with change, right? Shifting from the status quo to something else. We have the habit of the thing that we've been doing, right? And there's that notion of anxiety that is sparked from the idea of, well, I don't want to change. I don't want to, I don't want to make that switch. And then on top of that, if we zoom out, the notion of switching comes from that idea of jobs to be done and that framework. So maybe can we zoom out for a moment and talk a little bit about what does the idea of there's a job that we're looking to be performed by a product or a service, and what are those component parts of that job?
Right. And so maybe to connect the dots, jobs to be done is a well-known buzzword at this point.
Yeah.
I think part of the problem it faces is that it's practiced in multiple ways by multiple people. Mm-hmm. Some are more friendly to products, some are more friendly to marketing and sales. I've glommed onto this one practice by Bob Mesta, who was a very close confidant friend of Clayton Christensen, who wrote the seminal book on jobs to be done.
Yep.
And his principal research tool, as I described earlier, is the switch interview. Yeah. Let's study why 5 people switched in and 5 people switched out in the last 3, 6, 12 months.
Got it.
And through their stories, broken down in documentary form, all the dominoes I've described, we will be able to see what their job to be done is. And we'll actually see that across our customer base, we have multiple people with different jobs to be done, and they'll cluster in a new way. And so it's sort of essentially building a replacement for personas as they're classically understood, now organized by why people switch or what they're trying to accomplish rather than who they are in demographic data.
Yeah.
Now, jobs to be done is a very wonderful product customer theory that, people pull products into their lives to help them perform a job. And if things work well, they'll hire it again. If they don't, they'll find a new way. But we're always trying to get to the other side of the mountain, or climb the mountain, or get to the other side of the river. And we're using tools at our disposal. And the switch interview allows us to see when a product is underperforming at a job, and then what a customer, through their struggle, decides fits better. And so in a sense, the switch is the admission that the old tool is not helping us accomplish the job that we have today.
Yeah.
And we need to go through the journey of identifying a replacement tool that will allow us to accomplish the job with greater ease, faster, easier, cheaper, whatever it might be.
Yeah. I'd like to dig in a little bit more about actually a topic that came up when you and I initially talked. And I think it was a statement that you made, and I took a note on it, this idea that switching is messy. Can you say a little bit more about that, and maybe what those places are and why it might seem so messy to an uninformed observer?
Yeah, and I'm curious if I want to use the word messy still, but I think what I might be trying to clarify there is that people ask us all the time why we do what we do.
Sure.
When I moved to Atlanta, people constantly said, "Why did you move here?
Right.
What was going on?" And I think the question suggests that I have about 2 or 3 sentences worth of information to convey,
Right.
and that should wrap in a bow a clear summary of why I'm an Atlanta resident now.
Right.
And when I say it's messy, it's that 6, 7 dominoes fell over the course of 5 years that led me to slowly detach from DC, my former home,
Yep.
and pick Atlanta as my new city. And that story unfolded in fits and starts over an extended period as dominoes fell, whether it be 6, 7 scenes like a documentary, like walking down the street of DC and for the first time saying, maybe I don't want to live here anymore. Going on a vacation or a trip and being like, this place is pretty cool. Unwinding my commitment to full-time work, which gave me the permission to leave. Feeling the pressure of the cost structure of DC and the flexibility to travel and thinking maybe my home base should be a cheaper town.
Yeah.
And it all concluded someday in me saying, Atlanta, that's where I'm headed. That's just one story, right? But I could talk about this Peloton bike behind me and how I broke up with running on the street. We're constantly making these switches in our life. And I suppose they're just not linear, is what I'm trying to argue. They are 2 steps forward, 1 step back, tug of war, extended periods of time as we build conviction that it's time to give up this good enough way and find a new way in a world where, as you described, habits are sticky. The status quo is powerful. And we need to erect or build conviction, an argument in our head that we are finally going to apply energy to changing this thing that isn't working anymore.
Yeah. And as you said, it's not something that happens on a very specific timeline. A switch doesn't occur from one day to another. It might actually occur over the course of 6 to 12 months. And just because I gave it a time frame just then also doesn't mean that in order to be a switch, that it only needs to take 6 to 12 months, right? It could take a day, it could take a couple weeks, several years. These are things that might elongate into a variety of different time frames.
Yeah, for sure. And I think our demand for a new way is born the first time we think maybe this old way isn't working anymore. Something about my job isn't working like it used to. I'm now considering that I'll leave. But at that point, we're unwilling yet to put energy to the journey of switching, right? It isn't at the top of the to-do list yet. And so how do grievances mount to the point where it's at the top of the to-do list? And you asked about the structure of an interview or how they unfold, right? The whole point of the interview at first is to bookend the switch story, right? Okay. Where does the story end? Where does the story begin? And those are sort of bookend a journey, scene 1, scene 7 of a movie that you could watch of your customer building conviction that it's time to break up with you, and then going to the trouble of finding a new way, which also takes effort, right? We can sit exasperated for a very long time because we just can't figure out the new way yet. And so then the issue, once you've bookended the conversation, is to hunt for energy, to look for emotion, frustration, excitement, the energy that helps us move from old status quo to new status quo. And those emotions, that energy, help us see the sort of dominoes as they fall to get us closer and closer to picking a new way.
Yeah. So Aaron, you were talking a little bit about, you gave 2 examples from your real life. One about the Peloton versus outside running, and then another one about moving from the DC area to Atlanta. Using the framework of a switch interview, can you walk us through one of those examples?
Sure. I'll take the DC to Atlanta example, and I'll try to be as succinct as I can, since it took 6, 7, 8 years to unfold.
Right.
I think the sort of original sort of first thought is difficult to sort of ascertain specifically when it happened, but I think I had a clear sense that I was walking the same streets and living the same life at 35 in the same neighborhood
Mm.
that I was when I was 22, 23. And
Felt
that,
repetitive.
yeah, I think that my life could use a little bit dynamism. And so I started
I
taking all
see.
these trips to cities in America that were interesting to me. I'd spend
Okay.
4 days a week, 4 days, a 4 day weekend in Nashville, Austin, Minneapolis, Pittsburgh. And I started to sort of see that the grass could be greener on the
Right.
other side, if that makes sense. And so I think there was a period of passive awareness
Mm.
after that sort of first thought that there was something happening within me. I'm sure the 2016 election sort of played a small role. DC itself was beginning to change. I was
Sure.
less interested in the puzzles that DC people were working on. And
Mm.
so I say another domino there. I was falling out of love with the work that I was doing and sort of
Mm.
exhausted with that. But I think I had various habits that made, in spite of the pushes, the grievances that were building up with DC, and the magnetism I was beginning to feel to Austin's Tacos or
Mm-hmm.
friends I had in Atlanta, which is
Mm-hmm.
sort of where things ended up, or all the other attributes of all these wonderful places in America. I ultimately had some habits that were difficult to break. I had a
Yeah.
full-time job I was committed to, expected to be at Monday through Friday every week.
Okay.
And I was dating a woman whose family was from DC. And as
Mm.
long as we were together in the short run and the long run, we were probably going to be DC residents. And
I
so
see.
those habits made it difficult to unwind my commitment to DC anyway.
Okay.
I think things became more active. So there was a pivot from a passive understanding of my options to an active search shortly after I broke up with that woman
I see.
and that work. And so I was an independent consultant enjoying DC, but felt like maybe there was somewhere else to be. Now, I had a unique problem, which is I had a lot of push, a lot of grievances that had built up with the old way.
Mm-hmm.
My habits had been broken, so I was free to do whatever I want.
Mm-hmm.
I had very little anxiety, although breaking up with the city you've been in for 15 years is a big decision.
Sure.
Picking a new one is a small decision.
Sure.
But I had not enough pull anywhere. I didn't have
Okay.
an obvious place to go. And so I had to do a lot of work to find a home.
Yeah.
The search process and the selection took a lot more effort in this switch than the average one.
I see.
If I set out to spend 6 weeks in 4 different towns that I was interested in. I
Okay.
was going to pick one at the end of that journey.
Okay.
1 week into that journey, the pandemic began. I was in an Airbnb in Atlanta.
Oh, wow.
And so I ended up spending 6 months there, living above somebody's roof,
Wow.
garage, enjoying this town and being, getting a sense of what was here, but doing so in the safe pandemic ways. And then when that ended, I finally said, well, I won't ever see those other cities. This has been a great home. I think that something that's sort of important about the story is, I was at a certain point in my life where I was unwinding my commitment to the hustle that's required when you live in a city like DC, New York, San Francisco, the expensive cost structure that comes with that.
Okay.
And so as I was sort of going on a more exploratory, what am I going to do with the rest of my life journey,
Mm-hmm.
Atlanta fit in a way that other cities might not have. And so that's sort of, if I talk to you, like, how do I piece together my job to be done here? If I wanted to summarize, I was looking for a less demanding town that gave me the space and freedom to explore what I wanted to do with my life at that
Mm.
point, what jobs and work and puzzles I wanted to solve.
Mm-hmm.
And Atlanta fit comfortably. And in the context of the pandemic, it was a familiar place. I had friends there. I went to university down here. And so there were all these forces at play in my story, things pushing me away from DC, things pulling me to various places. But ultimately, in the crucible moment of having to make a decision, having to replace my old way with a new way, A, that story took a long time. And B, I ended up picking a very familiar, comfortable place with a cheaper lifestyle that would allow me to do that. There's more to this story that I'm not even mentioning. My mom lives in the DC area. I was breaking
Ah,
up with seeing her every week,
sure.
I had a lot of anxiety about that,
Right.
and so I had to sort of make peace with that. And I ended up getting a larger place in Atlanta just to accommodate open door policy that she could come visit whenever she wanted. So there's just a lot of negotiation between past and future. And while I'm giving you a very convoluted example around where I live, which is a big decision,
Right.
these things unfold with smaller and smaller items. It's just a little less messy and a little less baggage associated with those decisions.
Yeah. I hear you. And it sounds like as you go through someone else's switch journey, there are going to be different parts of it for different people. Would this decision have played out in the same way had you not been stuck in Atlanta during the first part of the pandemic? Not sure, but you also can't rewind it and go back and say, well, I'm going to go and visit Austin or visit Pittsburgh or visit some of those other places as options, but that's where you ended up. You evaluated that while you were there, and that's the decision you ended up making.
Yeah, there's something so powerful you said, and it'll help me move away from being so wonky about all this because it doesn't seem as practical or applicable to the average person, perhaps, or maybe it's applicable to everybody.
Right.
But if you study 10, 12, 15 of your customers, you will be surprised to learn that switches to and away from your product happen in different contexts with different value judgments and different expectations and needs because your customer you don't have a singular type of customer, but you don't have infinite. You have 3, 4, 5 clusters of people with different jobs to be done. And so one thing that's so powerful about the switch interview for me is it isolates when the swap, old way for new way, makes sense to a customer base.
Right.
You think everybody should break up with their old way because your product is obviously amazing and superior.
Sure.
But the trade, old way for new way, happens in very specific moments when the chessboard is moved around in a way that makes the old way seem intolerable, untenable. It is time for me to transition to my new way. And most of a customer base, most of the people you consider prospects or on these large lists of people that you are sort of built into your territories as salespeople, most of those people currently don't live in a context which brings them to the precipice of switching. Now, you can alter and play with that trade and swap to create more energy and excitement about your product or lower the price or do different things to sort of at the margin adjust the dynamics of that trade, the variables that matter.
Right.
But most people are stuck in their old status quo and are not going to change today.
Right.
But if you identify the specific moments when they do make that trade, those can be your personas, your clusters. People in these 3, 4 contexts go to the trouble of breaking up with their old way and picking a new way that is us.
So through the process of detailing this out for a company around their product or their service, what are the things that you, as someone who focuses in on, among other methods, this switch interview, what is the thing that you go back to your client or the person, the group that you're working for? What do you go back to them with? There's the story of switching, but what else is a company or an organization looking for when they say, Aaron, come in, we want to do some switch interviews, as you said, qualitatively, 5 to some amount, 5 to 10 maybe. What is the thing that you as a practitioner go back to them with?
I think the essence of what a switch interview reveals for a company is demand.
Okay.
Demand agnostic to a solution.
Okay.
There are natural springs of it in the universe, people who are motivated to find a new way.
Yeah.
And a company's responsibility is to map supply, its product, its processes, to that natural well or spring of demand.
Sure.
And the switch interview shows you the strongest sources of demand in your customer space.
Okay.
What does that practically look like for me? It is something akin to personas, organized by job to be done or why people switch, not who they are. And it could be a 15, 20, 25 page report with 4 jobs to be done and a series of questions answered about each job to be done, about what language are people with this job using.
I see.
What are the design requirements for somebody with this job that are different from job 2, 3, and 4?
Right.
What are these people willing to sacrifice through the decision-making process that these others won't?
Mm-hmm.
What various attributes of sort of demand, what is demand and what should you do about it, in sort of at least a 4, 5, 6 page profile for each customer.
Got it.
Sometimes I would add that there's, in the context of that, my clients are different. Sometimes they have an acquisition problem where that sort of map of their customers is fantastic. Sometimes they have a churn problem. There you're sort of evaluating across the 4 jobs to be done identified. You're performing really well with job 1 and 3,
okay,
but 2 and 4 are good and awful.
right.
And let's unpack why this group with this job to be done are unsatisfied with the fit of your product in their context.
I see.
And how can we tinker with the product or admit and give us permission to not serve that job to be done, either because it'll be difficult to serve them or because it's too small a group or whatever.
Got it.
Anyway, I think it's ultimately an analytic, but again, I sort of zoom out to that question of it's supposed to be, the switch is supposed to be a mirror onto what demand is in the universe and when people are most motivated to change.
Yeah.
So that you can position your product, whether it be the building of it, the marketing of it, the selling of it, to those specific doors people are walking through, not to some general wishful idea of who and what characteristics are likely to need us someday.
Got it.
You want to position for the moments that people are motivated to change.
Yeah.
And this tool helps us identify those moments in great clarity through 12, 15, 20 examples.
Got it. So that idea, that motivation to change, you referred to it previously as the precipice upon which someone is standing that makes them move from the status quo, the things that they've done before, to this new thing, this buying, deciding, moving into another space. I wonder that precipice, that moment in which someone changes, goes from A to C. Mm-hmm. How does that potentially factor into a product or service?
Sure. Maybe here I have a fantastic example that may take a little bit to get out, but I have a friend. She has a wedding dress business. Okay. Here, the switch isn't from dress A to B, but it's in how the dress would be purchased. So her business has a try-at-home experience. Rather than going to the boutique and trying on 4 dresses over 60 minutes, women are able to order dresses to their home. And over the course of 72 hours, can try on a dress as many times as they want with whoever they want. And it's a very, in her eyes, modern way to experience the dress purchase process. Now, her instinct originally was that modern women of all types are confident in their ability to buy things online and that they're willing in 2024 to make that decision. And so she can just name a couple grievances people have had with the boutique and people will naturally map her solution to their context and make the transition to using her service and buying her dresses in this way. And I pushed back and I said, I think that this trade, the old way, the boutique, for the new way, buying it over the internet, but specifically with a try-at-home experience of a boutique quality dress, would only happen in very narrow contexts where that trade made sense to the woman in the context in which they were living. We did 12 or 15 of these interviews, and there were 3 clusters of women. Cluster 1 were women who lived 3, 4, 5 hours from the big city. There was a boutique nearby. It was run by a 75-year-old, well-intentioned woman. The inventory felt quite dated, and so they wanted the access to that big city dress where they were. They considered the logistics of getting the friends to go up to Atlanta, Chicago, New York for the weekend, but it didn't work out. And so Tina's, my friend's service, allowed them to have access to those wonderful boutique dresses in their current context without the commitment of a purchase from minute one.
Got it.
Cluster 2, a much bigger cluster in my opinion, is women who felt uncomfortable at the boutique. They were
Mm.
indecisive. They couldn't make a decision in 60 minutes. They didn't like being the center of attention. They didn't
Got
have
it.
friends to go with to the boutique.
They might have felt rushed.
Sure. Where could they experience this that would be better? Their safest, most comfortable place, their apartment, house, bedroom,
Yep.
their mirror.
Yep. Their lighting.
They could try it on 3 times a day for 3 days, really build confidence and conviction this is the right
Sure.
choice. Waves of friends coming over,
Sure.
all the different ways to allow them to feel comfortable with this dress. The third cluster had to do with the pandemic originally, that buying a wedding dress is a team sport.
Okay.
It involves multiple generations, mom, grandma. And so, but during the pandemic, it was a bride alone going to the boutique. And so taking it out of the boutique into the home in this way allowed a bubble and multiple generations to keep that team together and to keep that experience together. I thought this was a pandemic thing, and then I got married. And my wife's mother, my mother-in-law, has mobility issues. She could not go to 4 boutiques on a Saturday afternoon. It would have been strenuous for her. And so we were able to restore the team, to keep the team together. We had a tea party I wasn't there, but a tea party in our living room.
Sure.
All the women came over, all the friends. Everyone tried on every dress. There was a theme. There was this experience that the mother got to be a part of. We specifically organized it around her trip to visit us. And it was a really pleasurable experience that was aided by Tina's company.
Okay.
Now, if I pull back and answer your question, I think once you see the specific context in which your product makes sense and doesn't make sense for others, this is a small percentage of the market. Now, it's 2 million dresses are sold in America every year.
Sure.
So if 10% of the women, 15% of the women live in these 3 contexts, that's actually quite a bit of opportunity to go after, but it's not the whole market. It's not all modern women. Here, the implications tend to be much more marketing focused. I know how to whisper into this woman's ear and have them feel like I empathetically understand what's going on in their life today and when does this trade make sense for them and why. But there are product implications, the experience, right? The fact that we had this tea party, Tina could have all these party favors thrown into the box, right? She could create that experience for them.
Right.
And yeah, I'm not very good at understanding wedding dress design, but it's possible that there were some implications of the stories that I didn't do a great job capturing there about lace and amount of lace for different clusters.
Sure.
But either way, it sort of reveals again who in what context goes to the trouble of becoming your customer. Just allows you to market, sell, design for those people making that trade today, with the assumption that the rest of the market or some percentage of the market will evolve into my context eventually. The pressure will mount in their lives and they will look around for options and they'll see that we're perfectly built for the context.
I think both of those examples that you just cited around the switch from the DC area to Atlanta, and then the switch from not having a wedding dress to having the wedding dress that you are most comfortable with on this one very important day, carries with it an immense amount of emotional, intellectual, and social weight to make sure that you're comfortable with this switch from no wedding dress to this is the wedding dress I'm going to wear during my wedding.
Absolutely. It's, all jobs to be done have social, emotional, and functional components to it. And this one clearly has a heavy dose of emotional. And sort of just to bring back some of those switch forces ideas, I think that buying a wedding dress over the internet or paying for it to be shipped to your house, which is part of the arrangement, creates anxiety. I think a lot of the women had anxiety about switching to a try-at-home experience. And only when those contexts were so vibrant that I just described, did that overcome the anxiety, right? They were the typical bride, and most brides are still just going to go to the boutique. And so you're just trying to understand when those trades make sense. But yeah, I think, and if we get back into that messy idea from before, lots of people are sitting unhappily in their old way, it's messy because it's hard to cross the chasm between your old way and your new way.
Right.
That journey takes work,
Right.
and there's a lot of emotion, a lot of social dimensions, lots of things going on that make it hard for us to make progress.
Yeah.
And you asked what is jobs to be done. I think ultimately jobs to be done is at its very core about helping people make progress. They have a job to be done, and products fit or don't fit in their life in
Right.
order to allow them to make progress. But the bride in rural Georgia, for her to make progress, she would like access in the way that she has decided she wants to make progress. A beautiful big city dress is part of that story. Then she needs a service like Tina's,
Yeah.
and so jobs to be done is ultimately about understanding vectors of progress and then fitting into them and along those journeys.
Got it. Yeah, that it all absolutely makes sense, and I think it ladders up. Aaron, one thing that I'm wondering is, as we're discussing this topic and we've gone into some examples and we've talked broadly about switch interviews and then also a little bit about jobs to be done, is there an area that we haven't covered yet that you would like to get into and spend some more time on?
I could talk for a few hours about this and then every day getting better at it. I think the last thing worth bringing up is, and it's funny because it's my biggest challenge, and it was my challenge when I told you that story about being exposed to this for the first time. It's very my clients, or as I view my customers, and I will use a word that's not very generous, but it's a word that I embodied heading into my jobs to be done experience, is hubris. My customers, it's very hard to find people in the universe who are at the executive level who are willing to admit that they don't know the answers to these questions. Why do people switch products? And if I was sort of wrap this in a bow and try to explain it best, I think my customers tend to be people who are pre-hubris. They haven't yet built conviction as to who buys their product and when, like my friend Tina. And then there's post-hubris. The numbers are demonstrating that I don't know the answers to these questions because we have a switching problem. That is, not enough people are buying a trickle in, or there's a switching out problem, a flood out. And clearly, I don't know anymore why this happens. And if I pull up and try to sort of do my best, is that we all have a placeholder answer for this. Why do people switch? Why do people buy our product? Why do people stop buying our product? What is going on in their life when they make that decision? What we tend not to know, and it is dangerous, is why did Skipper or Aaron buy our product or switch to us at 2:42 p.m. on Thursday? Why not the week before? Why not the week after? And I think it's that context that forced us today to put the effort in, to today make the decision, that is so important to understanding the crescendo moment of the decision that is so impactful to our bottom lines. And so I think it's surprising how long people can sit in their hubris. I did. Again, I'm not being mean, I hope, and delude ourselves into thinking we know the answers to these questions, but we really just don't. And I think it's dangerous to not get to this granular level of specificity. And these are the revenue generating and destroying events in our company's history. They happen every day. They're ordinary. And we tend to study them in the spreadsheet. We tend to ask a few questions when it happens, but it's really narrow and focused on, what did we do to let you down? Why did this relationship between you and us break down? But there's a documentary here, 7-8 scenes, and we can bring that skill of asking questions and storytelling and narrative building to see how the whole thing unfolded, and it can instruct us or teach us how others will switch in or switch out. And these events are hiding in plain sight. They're studyable in this interesting way. And if you do, you'll get to that level of causality that is so critical to understanding how people actually enter and exit our lives. if we're a company. And there are lots of people whose jobs and job security and success and bonuses are all dependent on getting the switching dynamics right. And so I just wish more people had access to these stories or sought them out. And maybe that's my mandate. Let's study these switches in this granular way.
So one last question before we jump into our closing round. Aaron, if someone said to you, I'm interested in learning more about switch interviews or more generally about jobs to be done, what would you recommend them to look into?
The seminal best book on it either will be Competing Against Luck by Clayton Christensen, where he'll lay out in business school jargon what this framework is. If you're looking for a more in practice sort of look at it, Bob Mesta's Demand Side Sales is a fantastic book that brings it to sort of the granular real world level and has example interviews and whatnot in it. But really, I've been a sponge and obsessive about anything that Bob Mesta has created. If anything, he is my guru, and I aspire to be some kind of disciple from a distance. He has about 10 real live interviews in the public domain. The famous one is the mattress interview, but there are all kinds of other ones. There's one of a Porsche purchase. There's one of a Peloton purchase. And so just trying to understand that. And he's a very active person on podcasts. And so you can search in all your favorite podcast areas for just him talking about jobs to be done. I'll say that I think the switch interview is a misunderstood and underrepresented. If you Google it tomorrow or today, you won't find much. There's very little material on it. But again, the basics of it are the documentarian pulling together the 7 dominoes that fell that led me to break up with DC, pick Atlanta, running Peloton. And I think if you just look into those stories in that way, you'll be surprised at how much insight you'll personally grab even without all the materials.
Got it. I said one last question, but another one occurred to me. Do you see trends in the future about the ways in which something like the switch interview will evolve? Is there something you hope for?
I think it's a fringe thing that should be, it's a very fringe thing that should be much more central to the practice of most companies. Again, these are the revenue generating and destroying events in your company's history. And the only way to access them in this granularity is to talk to your customers. If anything, I fear that people will skip over this step and trust AI too much to piece together these things. But maybe the mistake most companies make that I wish they could undo is that they have all these breadcrumbs about their customers and their customer journeys that are very focused on the relationship between them and the customer, not the customer out in the universe in a context struggling to make progress in ways that may or may not include them at various junctures. And so I'm not sure I'm doing a great job of answering your question, but I fear that there's an opportunity for the world to see this thing and take it in, but that AI might force us all out of business. So who knows?
Well, AI is definitely the shiny object right now. A lot of people are either using it or wanting to use it in a variety of different ways. And so I think it's a good reminder that in order to understand these human relationships that we have with services and products, I think the best source for it is talking to those humans.
Yeah. And I think the switch interview captures all the weird idiosyncratic. Maybe there's one more thing I do want to say. The absolute magic of jobs to be done, and specifically switch interviews, is it's a mechanism to retrieve and interpret and eventually codify all the contextual details that happen around your customer's decision making that you do not have access to. And most of those details at first blush are idiosyncratic, they're unwieldy, they don't seem like the source of pattern. But when you let them sit, when you take your customer individuality seriously, and then you let those stories sit in all their glory as individual instances, it'll be shocking once you have 12, 15, 20 that some of those idiosyncrasies matter. Now, I don't know if AI will ever, without, unless it can interview customers in this delicate, messy
Right.
way, I don't know how those idiosyncrasies will not get lost if you're just trying to use data points we have to predict
Right.
things and to interpret things based off the buttons people press and all
Right.
that. And so,
Right. Well, definitely in terms of pattern recognition, or you used the word hubris before, or even this notion of bias that we all carry, I think that the current crop of AI tools are bogged down in a lot of that previous information that they may have been trained on, but not necessarily, like you said, this winding, idiosyncratic, gnarly sort of mess of how we come to, I'm going to switch from this product or service to this product or service. And I think that there are lots of different pieces. And I think that it would be challenging to capture all of that nuance.
yep, yep, for sure.
So let's get into our closing questions that we ask all of our guests on the show. Aaron, is there something in your life that you wish you would have learned earlier? And maybe it's not your home life, maybe it's something to do with your work.
I have a soapbox of some sort that I get on where I like to tell people that verbs are more important than nouns.
Ah,
I grew up in DC. Those are my formative professional 22 to 35 years.
okay.
And it's a noun town.
Ah,
People are subject matter experts. They work for specific political parties, for specific parts of our government. When you meet people, they tell you their nouns.
okay.
And it sort of came to me slowly, mostly through a question that a fancy man once asked me in an interview, which is, what are your
Okay.
verbs? And, I think the lesson there is that, the happiest years of our career are the ones where we can see the greatest alignment between what we're good at and what we like doing
Okay.
and what is expected of us in the jobs we do every
Okay.
day. Job descriptions are bundles of verbs, 15, 20, 25 of
Mm-hmm.
them. And each bullet, represents an activity of some sort that we'll do with some
Yeah.
regularity. And I am very much an independent researcher in this way because my verbs are ask questions,
Mm,
organize the answers, make recommendations through insight.
okay.
And so if you're asking me to summarize, I think that people early in their career think about nouns or think about what we study in
Yeah.
university. Where I was a
The
history major,
subjects.
right? But verbs are what matters. And if I sort of wrap this up, it aligns very well with the theory of happiness with flow,
Mm,
with that the sort of moments that we're so engrossed in our activities that we lose track of time. We should wake up and do those things as often as possible, and we can be mercenaries on the nouns for a surprisingly long time. But as long as our verbs are right, we'll be happy. But if you flip that, you'll be very unhappy,
uh,
and it's unsustainable.
uh. So, Aaron, what about something that you're really excited about right now? And by that, I mean something you're reading, something you're listening to, maybe watching. What's something that's capturing your attention?
Yeah, I'm an enormous baseball
Mm,
fan. So it's playoff season for me. There's two games every day. It's
okay.
fantastic. I also
Are
have
you a Braves
a very
fan?
deep understanding.
No.
No, no, not at all. It's just laundry to
Uh,
me. I grew up a Mets fan, but I had to break up with them because of bad
I
ownership.
see.
And so, but yeah, just the sport is, I've always loved it. And I have a special interest in the minor league baseball. And
Okay.
so I track the minor league season, go to minor league stadiums. Could probably name three, four, 500 minor league
Wow.
players for you right now if you will push me to. And so, and that's really drawn out of an interest in talent and talent management. So,
Okay.
how does an organization acquire and develop talent is just an interesting thing that has been a way for me to mature as I age my understanding of
Okay.
baseball. Anyway, I could have named a movie or a TV show or something, a book. I got better answers there too. I'm going deep on Cal Newport and deep work and just
Yeah.
trying to organize my life in a more serious way. But truthfully, I'm always looking at what's happening in the Arizona Fall League right now, or AAA, AA, single A baseball all summer. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
Got it. If you found yourself unexpectedly with a day off, with unlimited resources, what's something that you would want to do?
I like to sit in very quiet, peaceful places, and I like to move my body as such. So I'd probably find a fantastic 8-10 mile hike and then grab a beer, sit and look out at the water, more like a lake on a mountainside than a beach. I think sand is awful, so I hate the beach. The ocean's
Sand and
fantastic.
desserts in your mind.
Yeah, sand is the worst. I don't understand it. Yeah, so I think I just want to be outside, nature, long, beautiful hike. I also just like constant stimulation. So I guess I could do the same thing with a big city, right? I'd love to walk around Amsterdam or Porto or Madrid, Valencia, any of these places, and just walk for hours and sort of observe what is happening, the people, how they behave, the energies, voices, sounds of life, and somewhere strange. And so I think I like to explore cities and things on foot, and constantly, as an introvert, let those external stimuli float in and see what kind of picture sponge it all up and see what kind of impression I can develop of something.
Yeah. Sounds quite lovely. So, Aaron, we're recording here in October of 2024. What's one thing that you think will be true in 1 year?
This is the one I told you I didn't think I had an answer for. I have no idea.
It's fine.
I'm gonna cut this.
It's fine. Totally fine.
I'm an observer of the past, not a predictor of the future.
Nice. And then, Aaron, with our last question, for people who want to learn more about you and your work, apart from our discussion, where can they find more information about?
Yeah, the primary place I'm active is LinkedIn. Okay. I'm doing my best to show up there in an authentic and non-nauseating way. And so I struggle with how to do that. And but all my information is there. And 2-3 times a week, I publish something that tries to be a little bit better than the average discourse there. So yeah, but also happy to chat with anybody who's interested in what this means for them and or their business.
Okay. So. Thanks, Aaron, for making time today. Just talking more about this notion of switching and the way in which you approach your work as a researcher. I definitely learned a lot.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And it's always fun to workshop talking about this. And, I tend to sort of emphasize how it's interesting, but it's nice to also introduce stakes and sort of reveal how valuable it can be sometimes. So it's always fun to struggle towards figuring out that.
Yeah, articulating. And that's it for this episode of the How This Works show. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your support. We're focusing on growing our community this season. So if you enjoyed the episode, sharing it with just one person would mean a lot. Subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us online at howthisworks.show. That's 4 words with no dashes. Again, that's howthisworks.show. We're also active in most social media places. We appreciate you tuning into this conversation with Aaron Young. I learned a ton about Switch interviews. Until next time, remain ever curious, and we'll talk again soon.
It's always been my 2 truths and a lie, and it definitely gets attention. So.
As a sidebar, have you heard about Stephen Colbert's best cookie answer?
I haven't, but I suspect oatmeal raisin cookies are not it.
Half of it is an oatmeal cookie, but the way that he approaches it is that he's not a fan of raisins. A lot of people aren't fans of raisins and baked goods. But for him, where his cookie magic happens is by taking dried cherries infusing them with rum. So I don't know if you're a drinker or you like that sort of thing in your food. Infusing them with rum, then using that in an oatmeal cookie. And apparently that takes it to a whole other level.
Okay. Well, it sounds like me and my wife have some experimentation to do this weekend.
Awesome.